Thank you. Is it evening, afternoon? It's an afternoon in the evening. Good evening. Welcome to our live session, Bethesda Business Foundation. Foundation under the auspice of Bethesda Christian Center. And this is the second session or a series of a number of sessions where we discuss our creating a generation of outliers, which is the theme for the year. And seeing this today is the second series. Our series is basically on recover, build, and sustain. And operating under the environment of COVID, a number of things have happened in the country. We're coming from a recent uprise. We experienced it in the other provinces. And that also unsettled quite a number of people in the country, and also in the period of uncertainties and also information that gets lost around the issues of the vaccines and all those. So quite a number of things are happening in the country, and misinformation is one of the issues that also causes a problem. And the BBF is basically a platform where we share ideas, we share information, topical issues, current issues, and this is a platform where we talk and share ideas, we counsel, we share, we also provide support to those that in need of support. As the saying goes, sharing is caring. So welcome to the second series. As we said, it's recover, build, and sustain. And today's session focuses largely on some of our colleagues, some of our friends, some of our relatives, business partners, family partners, spouses, relatives, uncles, etc., those that were infected by the virus. And some were affected in terms of business, lost their jobs, others affected in terms of family breadwinners, causing tension in families and relatives, the stigma in the workplace, and quite a number of negative and adverse things that have happened in the country. And today's discussion centers around how then those that have been affected and infected, how do you recover, how do you build, and how do we sustain and build a better future for all. And that is our topic today. And in that regard, we have a special guest today who are basically specialists in a particular environment, psychological environment, clinical psychologists, as well as corporate environment as well. And our guest will be talking and sharing with us ideas around how do you then behave, deal with the stigma in the workplace, and then also how corporate environment can embrace this kind of situations. And then also speaking from a family point of view, or those that actually find themselves having to go to a hospital, also how then do you also find yourself in a space where you feel comfortable, and also in a space where in need of a service, you are also given that type of service. And our guests will be touching on those points, and with an intention to empower us with knowledge, courage, as well as a special message on how we behave, how we treat each other, and how we live together, recover, build, and sustain. Build from the little that we have, and sustain and multiply it for the better of the society. So I would like to welcome then our colleagues in the meeting here. We've got two guest speakers who will also introduce themselves, but high level is Bongiwe Sokela and also Dr. Elizabeth Mhlaba Dlamini, who are also going to be our guest speakers, and they will expand in terms of their experience, expertise, as well as their interest in giving this kind of advice and counsel to all of us. And then also in the team, who is basically going to be our moderator today, is Ayanda Peter, the chairperson of the foundation, BBF, joined by Sikhodi, as well as Lufuno and Nozizwe, and of course myself, Lwazi. Because it's a Women's Month, guys, these are my last words, and from now on, I'll keep quiet and I'll hand over to Imbogodo. Ayanda, over to you.
Thank you so much, Lwazi, for the introduction. Greetings and welcome to all of our listeners. Greetings and welcome to our team, and a special greeting and welcome to our very esteemed guests today, Mrs. Bongi Sokele and Dr. Elizabeth Mhlaba Dlamini. Thank you so much for indulging us today with your time, and especially with your knowledge. We are so delighted to get this opportunity to have this conversation with yourself. As Lwazi said, Lwazi is our moderator for BBF. And I think today he's trying to run away from some reason, but the fact that it's August and it's Women's Month, it gave him a good alibi to not be the one moderating today. But I must say also from my personal side, I'm very pleased and thrilled to have two lady guests today. As BBF, for some unfortunate reason, we tend to have a lot of male guests. And this is not a really great reflection on us or even the management team of BBF for that matter. So thank you so much, Dr. and Mrs. Sokele, for joining us this evening. As Lwazi has already stated, this is the second installment of our webinars for 2021. And our theme for 2021 is creating a generation of outliers. And as we were discussing this theme in preparation, our first installment was how do we recover? But as we discussed that, we realized that we would be very remiss to talk about recovery and building and sustaining in such an environment without addressing the immense psychological impact that this pandemic has had on every single one of us. I mean, it's actually quite spectacular to think about that this has infected the world. At one stage, the entire world was in lockdown. I don't think we've ever experienced that in our lifetime, and hopefully we never experience that again. We thus experienced immense financial loss, loss of people losing their businesses, and this still continues even to date. Businesses that are still functioning, some of them, are dealing with having to rechange people and therefore loss of disposable income. We are also talking about not only loss in the business and the professional aspect, but immense financial loss. Immense personal losses, whether it's loss of freedom of movement, loss of that human contact, and ultimately even the loss of human life, loss of relatives, and just disintegrating of families. So we thought, with all of that happening, how do we really recover? How do we build? And how do we sustain ourselves whilst doing what we can, but not forgetting our mental health? And on that note, as we said, we are so pleased to have, I'll just do a high-level introduction, to have Ms. Bongi Sokele with us. She has very highly qualified with a master's degree in clinical psychology. She has numerous years in clinical, being a clinical psychologist. She's has many years, over 13 years in corporate, working with human capital, being a human capital specialist, and also being a highly qualified and sought after coach in the corporate area, where she is a leadership, she deals with leadership coaching and many other genres within the coaching space. And to complement this, we have Dr. Mhlaba, who is a physician in the critical care, and she works both in the private sector and in the public sector. And I really just can't wait to delve deep into discussions with our two guests today, because really it's going to be quite a power-packed conversation. But before I go further, I would just like to give our guests, as I said, it's a very high-level introduction that I have given. I'd just like to give our guests an opportunity to individually introduce themselves. Who are they? Outside of what I've just said, where are they operating at the moment? And really take us through what is the current experience in those environments, considering our topic of discussion today. If I can start with you, Dr. Elizabeth, if that's okay.
Yes, good evening to everyone. I'm Elizabeth, as Ayanda has already mentioned. I'll just correct just one thing. I'm an emergency physician. So I know sometimes, emergency physician, because most of the time when you say physician, then you think of the internist, like internal medicine ones. So I specialized in emergency medicine. Currently, I'm subspecializing in critical care, meaning being a specialist in the ICU setting. I've been in this environment for ICU for just under 3 years. I've been a doctor for over 16 years now, and been in the emergency department for over 13 years as well. I'm a wife and mother of 2 kids. That hasn't been also easy now with the pandemic, having to juggle stressful environment at work, and also personal life, financial life, financial aspects of things as well. And of course, you're not an island. There's also family, extended families, and it has really been tough. And as mentioned already, I work in Steve Biko and Kalafong Hospital, and I also work in some Netcare hospitals as well. And the pandemic has thrown, I think, all of us in whatever sphere of life or work, it has really affected each and everyone in such a tremendous way, and we've all found ourselves, I think, at any given moment, feel like your back is against the wall. You're like in a little corner. You don't know what to do. You are helpless, because most of the time this is actually beyond our control at times. And I think at times you might feel like, this is just you experiencing this, or maybe you are just the only one that's being overwhelmed with this situation, but you are not alone. We've all been through it, and it doesn't matter at which level of life or financial standing you are in. All of us have been affected in a big way. So I feel honored to be part of this talk tonight. I can actually go on and on about experiences like from my side, but I think also it will be important to hear from everyone else, and also to get questions, so that at least as we go forward and we address this issue, we actually look at what other people are concerned about, and what they would actually like to be assisted or supported or clarified on certain issues as well. So I think mine would be a short introduction, and we can take it from there. I'm sure Bongi will have much more to say. And that one thing I've actually noticed is the neglect of our mental health. Because we often feel we need to be strong. You know how a friend of mine was saying that it's like we've been sold this fallacy of, a strong Black woman. And then everyone just expects that it doesn't matter how much life throws your way. You just have to stand strong. You just have to keep going and keep going. And that is true in a way, but then it just gives the false impression that it's not okay for you to just break down and cry. It's not okay for you to actually say, you know what, I don't know how I will take the next step. And I think for one to reach that stage and to acknowledge that this is actually burdensome, and let's say I'm feeling depressed, drained, I'm anxious, because then once you recognize that, that's actually a step towards getting support and help as well, and not just to withdraw because now you can't actually express how you are feeling because it will be taken as a sign of weakness. And the other thing, especially in my field of work, like as doctors, it's like you just have to be like a robot, if I can put it like that. You are not supposed to be sick. You are not supposed to have mental issues. You are just supposed to be working and working and working. Where you get the energy from that never ends, I do not know. But I think also in like our training, it's like you just have to be there. Even when you are feeling under the weather, no, you're not admitted in hospital. You can still work. You come to work. So those are just some of the things that we have to get through as a people, learning to support one another and recognizing that we are human. So I think that's one of the things that we also have to take cognizance of. Over to you, Bongi.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Doctor, for that introduction. And I liked a couple of points that you raised. Firstly, that you can talk on and on, so our conversation is not going to go dry. But also just talking on the aspect of the immense vulnerability that we find ourselves in. After you mentioned women being strong and we being called Imbogodo, the month of Imbogodo, and you find ourselves in a position where we finally have to, especially as Black people, we finally have to address the issues of depression, anxiety, and even imposter syndrome. And the real, you just hit the real crux of why we're having this webinar, to say that firstly, you are not alone. We are all going through this. The isolation of, working from home, not seeing your colleagues, not seeing your family and friends can make you think that you are alone in this. You are not alone. And secondly, to be strong at this point, we have to be vulnerable, break down and cry, and then recover and rebuild. But over to you, Bongi. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, Elizabeth. That was, I agree with everything that Elizabeth says. I think there's nothing else that I can say. Elizabeth, you can just, we can close. So my name is Bongi Sokela. I am a wife and a mother of 3, and feel sorry for me raising teenagers. So I think it, raising children puts you in that same state, of not knowing. And it's so normal. Actually, we underestimate how normal it is to live in uncertainty. It is part of our lives. And when something like this, that is very different, like COVID and everything else that we see in our society, we should not see it as something that we have not gone through it. It just comes in different versions. And we have to draw from, past experiences that we have overcome, So let me just finish my introduction. I am qualified as a clinical psychologist, has worked in clinical work for a while, early enough in my career. And for some reason, when I got married and changed provinces, I happened to land in a corporate space. And at that time, you know, I happened to have an employer that thought that clinical psychologists would make a difference if they work in organizations, even though you might know that there are industrial psychologists in that space. But, you know, if you've learned human behavior, you can apply your learning whichever space that you're thrown into. So that's how I got into corporate work, and I've been there for, I suppose, almost 13, 14 years now in various organizations. And I've worked in the banking space, in the insurance space, and now I'm working for a pure investment business, which is quite an interesting, and it ticks my boxes in any way in terms of my purpose as a person. And yeah, I think it's something that would be nice to talk about, because, you know, when we get into a state of, you know, living in fear and uncertainty, it's important to be, wherever you are, all of us, wherever we're working, you know, if you're not passionate about what you're doing, it's going to put you in such a negative downward spiral that you have to question yourself the importance of what it is that you're doing. I can't imagine, for instance, being a healthcare worker at this time in our lives, working in where every day you're waking up, you don't know whether you're going to, you know, how many people you're going to see die before you. If you're not passionate about that, then, you know, then it can be quite depressing, I would assume, as Dr. Elizabeth said. But same in the workplace. I think people, as an employee, you might think that, you know, employers know everything. Employers, when they're hit with situations like this, they start from scratch as well and research and find out what the world is doing, what is the best way of doing, and pull, you know, specialists into that workplace. You know, the issue of COVID has hit the work, as Lwazi said earlier, entrepreneurs, especially smaller businesses, they have to reinvent themselves in terms of how they can sustain themselves in this, in the pandemic. So are we as individuals and as parents, as family members. You know, we have to confront what it means when it affects ourselves, what it means when our families need us, but our jobs also need us, and we like stuck in between. We have to do the best that we can do in the moment. But what I want to agree with Ayanda with is, you know, we have, and I would like for today to be like that, that let's accept the reality of where we are. You know, we cannot pretend to be strong when we are not strong, and I think that's why the conversation needs to flow between ourselves and the listeners and the viewers, and understand, as Elizabeth said, what are we facing that we haven't seen, and if we have seen it, we'll be glad to share how, you know, the world is reacting to that, the workplaces, you know, the clinicians are reacting to that. But I just want to say that it is okay not to be okay, because then you identify it, because then you don't sit in this, you know, illusion that you are okay and everyone else can see that you're not. So it's okay to accept it so that you can learn from yourself and what it is that you need to draw from the strength of others. So I'd really like to do that, even if we draw from our own experiences where we have felt. I'll make an example where, you know, when you're working from home, for instance, for those that are lucky enough to, I don't know if it's lucky or not, depends how you experience it, is when you don't know what your manager is thinking about you, for instance. It puts me as a person in a very uncomfortable position, because I don't know whether he thinks my performance, or whether he thinks I'm productive. I may be working a 10-hour day, but if my manager doesn't think so, it actually means nothing, is it? You know, or your work needs to speak for itself. But for most of us, some of our work does not generate an output that shows that we are doing something. It's unlike if you are at work where everyone is seeing you are busy. So I think a lot of people, feel that threat of, do people think I'm working? I'm working more than I should. I need to take time for my children. Will that be seen as slacking? Can I ask for this? Can I ask for a time out, for a leave when I'm working from home? So these are the things that we all grapple with. It's the living in the uncertainty. We call it in psychology living in the edge of chaos, because chaos will throw us into, life will throw us into chaos. But guess what? The pendulum always brings it back to, calm. That is what life is all about. And if you understand that there will be hard times, but that pendulum always swing us to, calm, always calm before the storm, then that gives us, comfort that this is not for life. We're not going to be in this forever and ever. And our resilience actually in a threatful environment grows. You could be amazed in terms of how much you have grown as an individual from 2 years ago to what you have actually become right now. And those are the things that we need to count. We should not count the people that obviously, it's helpful when you lose people, but don't count too much on the negative that you forget about seeing the opportunities that comes with the situation. Like this, we go through pain, but through pain we build that resilience that make us stronger people, that the next time we hit something much bigger than what we are experiencing now, we do have that resilience. We do have those skills that we can draw from our repertoire deep inside that has been building over the years, and we should take comfort in things like those. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Bongi. In fact, whilst you still have the mic, before you mute yourself, an anecdotal story about muting. Last year, when we first started having these webinars and Zoom meetings, I kept on forgetting to unmute myself throughout the day, and I'd be talking, nobody can hear. Then the following day, when we met again, and before the meeting started, we did a what did you learn yesterday, from yesterday? And I said, well, firstly, I learned to unmute myself. That was my most important lesson of the day, that particular day, sometime in March 2020. But Bongi, I really like what you said about living in the edge of chaos. And you also just married it with the positivity of what we can get out. But if I can just maybe dwell a little bit on that, living on the edge of chaos, to say, looking specifically in the work environment. So there's many aspects that we are affected in, and our audiences are, employees, employers, business owners, entrepreneurs. But looking specifically in the career aspect, where you most likely are finding yourself, if you are one of those people that is finding yourself working from home, and as you said, maybe your output is not that tangible, and you're finding yourself immensely frustrated with your work not speaking for itself. And maybe you're just not even that way wired as a person. You thrive in human contact when you're seen, when you're arriving early at work and doing all those things. So there's probably that type of a person would probably be living at the edge of chaos for almost 18 months now. And what would we say to that person, from your experience and your knowledge in human capital? And specifically, I like the industries that you've been working in who have been affected, maybe not so much financially, but in the work from home and possible career stunting. What would you say to those people who are living in fear that their career trajectory has been stunted by the current environment. And there's a possibility that the way we operate now is going to be for quite an extended period of time.
Yeah, funny enough, my niece asked me that same question recently. She's starting a new job and she is an intern. And as she started the job, you know, then the adjusted level 4 started and they had to go work from home. And she's so she has a mentor, she has a manager. She's like, the mentorship is not working. And I don't know when to talk to should I talk to my manager? Should I talk to? So there's a lot of those uncertainties, whether you are an intern or you are a specialist, senior specialist, middle manager, senior manager, as long as you, even CEOs, you know, in the room that have board members to report, to an account to, you have that level of uncertainty. What I would say is speak up. You know, recently I've had an opportunity of looking at some of the, the scorecard and the KPIs that we get at work, and everyone should have one. And when I looked at that, and someone was underperforming, and I said, but your expectation as a manager, you're looking for the output, but the scorecard is set out that a person should drive input, which is like, I've done so many reports, I've attended so many meetings, and all of us, that takes time, yes, but guess what? If your scorecard is saying that you should attend so many meetings and do that, it is not helpful to you in a work from home environment. What is required now is for you to look at whether your contract is helping you, for your organization to see value in what you are doing every day. So if it's not set up like that, my suggestion is, sometimes we wait for managers to set up meetings with us. It's like, set up time. No one can disagree to see the person that report to them. It's like, I need to have a conversation with regards to your expectation of me now that the environment has changed. What does this mean? How can I make sure that you see what I need to see? Has that changed? What has, because scorecards get stale if you as an employee don't take charge of that contract. It becomes something that you're going to be rated against. It becomes something that your bonus relies on. It should be like a passport. You know when your passport expires. And when your contract doesn't serve you, it's your responsibility to approach your manager and say, I'm not sure what this means now that I'm working from home. Does it mean the same thing? Should I do it differently? What is your if you don't know what your manager expects from you, it's going to be a ongoing uncertainty that makes working from home experience sour. And that's when people start to think, you know what, maybe I don't like this job. And maybe it's not that. It's just because that there is that structure has been taken away from you. And some of us work perfectly in structuredness. And structure is usually created by leaders. And when your manager is not there to set that structure, and you expect it to change the way that you think and process information, I can't even imagine how many people in this past review cycle that, they had to fight, for them to say, I did do my job, because, things change and you need to re-engage and recontract afresh in the work from home environment. Otherwise, you're going to set yourself up for a big failure, no matter how much hard work you do and the hours that you put in your work. So I would say to your question, Ayanda, is approach your manager and recontract afresh. Talk about your aspirations and your career advancement. Initiate that conversation. We are all adults, and that's the thing that is so important in the workplace. The fact that there is someone who is higher than you and you are sitting here that should not be a parent-child relationship. It is an adult-adult relationship, even though sometimes our leaders and managers, come into the relationship as if they are adults and you are a child, and it brings the child in. It naturally, if someone comes to you, have you noticed that if there are people where you can just engage and they can, you connect with them very easily because you feel like, when I'm looking at this person, they see me. And then there are people that just bring the fear in you. In that relationship, you've entered it as a child. It should not be so. So you need to be able to raise yourself and make yourself an adult in your relationship with your manager and approach them to define and make things clearer and much more structured for you. Structure in the situation where there's so much uncertainty is so important.
Wow, thank you so much, Bongi, for such a comprehensive answer to that question. And you've just hit on such important aspect. As adults, we go to work, but you think that, well, not all of us, but there's a tendency to think that your superior has the responsibility to make your life suitable to you, which is not the case. And you are basically informing somebody sitting in the corner right now who had no idea how are they going to recover, who is sitting at the brink of depression, sitting at the brink of thinking that their life is not going in the direction which they had anticipated in January 2020. And you are saying to them, you do not necessarily have to be sitting and feeling that way. There are avenues and there are active actions that you can take right now, writing notes right now, speak to my manager, make an appointment with my manager. Let's us look at, our KPIs and you are saying, let us grow and take control of our lives and not just be bums on seats in the workplace, but drive your career if indeed you did have any career aspirations to begin with. And then, yeah, Doctor, if I can just bring it back to you, the environment that you work in, I have such a deep sympathy for doctors during this period that we went through, and your work environment. I would just I don't really want to dwell on the negative, but when we talk about the experience and what is happening in the reality, we can then analyze it and provide solution. But if you can just share with us how, considering some of the information that we know about the challenges in the health environment, in the health sector, how has that exacerbated some of the challenges that you've had to face? And then also linking it to the career development aspect of being a doctor. How have you been able to navigate having this immense workload? And what you also mentioned to us earlier, that you are at a point where you have to be a robot. You have to be at work, you can't be sick, you can't have any other engagement. Nothing can happen in your life. And I'm assuming you don't even have time to then, study further and do other things that would have dictated your career trajectory in the medical field.
Yeah, so being in the medical field in this time has been very difficult. I often make fun of where we are as healthcare workers with my family, that, had I known COVID was coming, I think I would have been an accountant. So I love my job with all my heart. I love what I do. And I think if I didn't have a passion like Bongi mentioned before, I'd be gone. It's been tough on us as nurses, doctors, physiotherapists, everyone in the healthcare field that's actually seeing patients, because every day you go to work and you know you're going to be in contact and taking care of COVID positive patients. And I think what has been very strenuous it's when we have, you know, the waves, the load of patients that we have at any given time, which has actually overwhelmed the resources that most hospitals have, and not just public, also in the private sector as well. So it's not just specific or unique to one side of the healthcare sector. And when I'm talking overwhelming of resources, it's not just the equipment, also the human resource. So in that environment, the stress that comes with wanting to help, wanting to do everything that you can to take care and save as many as you can, but with limitations, and also with like a big load or like unexpected load that one person can actually take. I think I made an example earlier while we were chatting before, Ayanda, like in an ICU setting, you have one nurse looking after one patient. But in the COVID pandemic, with all the waves that we've been having, and the number of patients that have been there, because you can't say, no, I'm going to maintain my 1:1 ratio while there's a flood of patients that actually need care. So you need to see as many as you can. And you find sometimes it's like 1:2, 1:3. And as much as we would like to cut ourselves into many pieces so we can be everywhere at the same time, you can't. It has been so difficult that at times you come in to ICU or to wherever you are working, and people are in tears. And it's just because we are all not coping. And it has become so important that we hold together as workers, you know, as colleagues, that we support one another. And in an environment like that, even mistakes happen because you are just tired. Your brain sometimes is just not even working properly. So it's very important even for the next person to see that, you know what, Elizabeth, I think you are tired now, you need to rest. So that kind of support, I think that's one of the things that has actually helped most of us to at least, find our way through this storm. But the thing that adds also to the physical exhaustion, there's also emotional and mental exhaustion, the loss of lives, and so many at a time. I mean, I don't think in my entire career I've ever seen so many people die on the same day or at the same time, and losing patients, on top of that, losing colleagues that you've worked with and have been so close with, and you are thinking the more you lose in terms of colleagues, the more you lose in terms of work staff as well. And now there's also the relationships that are lost. And at the same time, there's also personal loss where you lose your own relatives. It becomes so overwhelming to a point where I sometimes I don't know how we actually make it from day to day, except just by grace. So that's exactly what I was mentioning when I started, that it's important to realize when you are exhausted, when you are overwhelmed, when you are at that stage where you just feel like, I just can't take another step. I can't. And I think I've been very fortunate as well, personally, to have a very supportive family, a supportive husband, my brothers and sisters, and also my friends and my colleagues. I actually work in an environment where the team actually holds together and care about people's mental health, which has actually helped a lot, because otherwise people break down and can't actually come back just because the support is not there. And the other thing is the stigma also that comes with mental health, which should not be there. And I think more of us have to speak out more about mental health, and also to support those that have mental illness, or have that moment of a breakdown, if you can put it like that. But mental health or mental illness is real, and many people, especially in these times of difficulties and heavy strain in our lives, emotionally, mentally, physically, more people are vulnerable, and actually end up having depression. We've had people committing suicide, and it's a horrible thing to think about at the end of the day. So it's been tough. It's still tough, but I think with holding together, supporting one another, and not judging, we can actually pave a way for us to actually take it one day at a time, and see, together we can actually do more in terms of surviving this pandemic.
Sure. Thank you so much, Doctor. Some of the things that you are talking about, we know about them, but when you are not personally in contact with a person in the medical sector, and you've never actually heard it come from the horse's mouth, so to say, you don't really feel the impact, and the picture that you've just painted for us is such a vivid, such a traumatic experience. But what I like is that you mentioned, my question to you was, but how do you cope? But you did mention that when you can't take a step further, it's your support from home, it's your support from colleagues, it's support from the work environment, which is very cognizant of mental health. And it's also support from your colleagues around you, who can see you, can be a shoulder to cry on, but not only that, can see when you are treading in dangerous territory, even for yourself, because you are probably working on an adrenaline high and just pushing and pushing and pushing. And this would be so important, just speaking to some of the business people, whether it's a small business person, an entrepreneur, that one of the aspects that really need to be taken very seriously during this time, and there's a couple of stories where the work environment is not taking this seriously, is that you need to allow the space for a proper working environment where teams can work together to support each other, despite being, dispersed geographically. There needs to be that team, there needs to be that purpose, and there needs to be that passion. And I'm not even going to touch on some of the toxic work environments and how you would feel now if you were already in a toxic work environment before COVID. But Doctor, if I can just pose another question to you. You touched on the family support. How are you balancing this almost insurmountable work stress unbelievable work stress and your home demands. You did say to us, in your introduction, that you are a mother, you are a wife, you do have, extended family that I think that to a certain extent you care for. How do you cope with that together? Because as much as your support, you didn't say how old your children were. Bongi said it's 3 teenagers. Oh, Bongi, I sympathize with you. I don't know how old your children are, but there's the added aspect of home caregiving, whether it's homeschooling, whether it's the stress of the children, and dealing with that and marrying it with unreasonable patience. We can be so unreasonable as patients, the unreasonable patients in your work environment, unreasonable visitors, and just how do you put it all together and try and find that balance? I know I'm asking a very elusive question, but how do you try? I won't say how do you find the balance. How do you try and find the balance?
Yeah, so the important word, they try, because that's really what we do every day. We just try to do our best every day. Just starting with what you mentioned, that we can be difficult patients, but one thing I've recognized is in dealing with people, especially, I think I've learned this when I was still in the emergency department. In the emergency department, no one plans to come and see you. When they come to see you, it's because some disaster has happened. Someone was in an accident, or sudden pain somewhere in your body. Emotions are high, and people are worried. Someone is sick, and it's easy for someone to shout at you because maybe they don't understand what's happening, or they're emotional. So I think in understanding that there's a concern, there's a worry, a loved one is sick, and you are just all emotional, that also helps. So I think for me, I've actually recognized the importance of explaining to the relatives as well as the patient in terms of what's happening with their loved one, the condition, where we are going, what we are doing. And most of the time, believe it or not, it settles a lot of people to actually know this is what's wrong with me. This is what doctor is doing. This is what's expected to happen, and they're going to do this, and the outcome will be this way, or we are not sure of the outcome, but it could be a possibility of one of two things. So I think having that conversation with your patients or the relatives actually goes a long way, and also helps with the relationship between the patient and the doctor as well, and it tends to make life easy. And having said that, it also makes it easy for me not to even carry that load of, oh, these people are so difficult, oh, these people are not grateful, because then once you get over that hurdle of settling or calming them down, you also feel like, you know what, as on top of doing the medical part that I've been trained for, I also did something to actually help someone understand, calm down, and lessen the anxiety that they have about being in a hospital. No one ever wants to be in a hospital. It's a stressful time in anyone's life. Having said that as well, balancing out, the balancing act is a difficult act in terms of like the social life, work life. My kids, I have two boys, 11 and 14. So they're also, I'm just so blessed because they're like understanding kids. Because if they were not, I think it would be very difficult as well. We do spend as much time as we do get. It's not that much anymore. Because I'm also in this whole COVID pandemic thing, even though I started before COVID, of course. I'm studying again, and I'm sitting for exams this month as well. So it's been a lot having to juggle work long hours and have to come back and read, stay up late until the AMs and have to still wake up early as well, 4:30, 5 o'clock, getting ready to go back to work. Often you are so exhausted, and any little time you get to get a nap and recharge and go again is actually very appreciated. So I think it's important to sit down. We communicate a lot with my kids, my husband and I, and in everything that happens, I think sometimes we tend to say, no, they are kids, you don't really have to burden them with so many things. But I've found that when you do that, that's where you have a lot of challenges of dealing with kids acting up just because they don't understand why all of a sudden things have changed. So I think with the changes that came into our lives with the pandemic, with me having to work extra hours. I mean, one time my youngest asked me, and he's like, "Mama, do all doctors work as hard as you do?" So I think it has helped to sit down and say, look, this is what's happening in my life. At work, I'm studying as well, and I'm trying so hard to make sure I give my best in everything that I do. And so in them understanding the situation, they've also been supportive as well. I mean, it's nice to come home and then your child asks you, "Mama, can I make you tea? Or can I make you some food?" I mean, as little as it is, it goes a long way. At least I can sit down, relax, put my feet up, and enjoy my tea. So it's also hard at times because as a mom, I've been very involved in my kids' life and academics, which at the moment I can't do. So the guilt at times it's at you that I'm not there for my kids as I would like to be. But at the same time, you have to understand that in this situation, something has got to give. Yes. And as long as at some stage when things kind of like fall apart, you can catch and do damage control, if I can put it like that. Let's say if you neglected to do something and then your child comes back in tears, make that time, no matter how busy you are, to sit and say, "I'm so sorry. I forgot. There was so much in my mind, but what can we do to fix this?" So there are times you can't do it all and be like perfect in everything. Sometimes little things slip up. And I think how I've tried to cope with everything, sometimes I feel like my head is in the cloud because I tend to forget things. So you tend to prioritize the most urgent thing, do or die. That's the first thing that has to happen. And then you keep things in like, there's a priority list. I'll get to that. If no one is dying, I'll get to it. And even with the relatives calling in and others thinking you're ignoring them, by the time you get to them, it's all about reassuring. We've been busy. I'm sorry I couldn't come back to you. How can I help? And, so when you get to that time, at least you try to make the most of that time, because you know that you might not get another time in the near future to actually spend with that particular person. So I think in communicating and trying to help people understand where you are at, I've been fortunate that even my dad also understands. I have a terminally ill mom, which has been another stressor in my life, and has really hit our family very hard in terms of the demand of having a sick mother, medical bills at a time when COVID hit. My husband is actually self-employed, as well as my brother. And when COVID came, you can imagine what that did to our income. I was just so grateful that at least my income was kind of assured, even though my little income was kind of like pocket money that all of a sudden had to sustain a lot of things. There was a time when I found myself, my child needing a new pair of shoes, and I actually couldn't afford. I remember breaking down in front of my prof, crying, because that has never happened to me, that I couldn't buy my kid a pair of shoes. So it's been a roller coaster, but by the grace of God, I actually can't even believe we are here at this moment. How we survived the past a few months, it's amazing. I really don't know how. That's why I'm like, I've seen God at work in my life in a very big way. I was even sharing before that I haven't gotten sick from COVID before, and that has actually made it like a bit of, you are a workforce. If you're not sick, because other people are going to get sick, and when you are not sick, you continue to work. And there's been times when, of course, leaves are cancelled, and you just continue to work tirelessly, and somehow we survived. I'm still standing, and I'm so grateful. So there is no recipe of how you keep things together, and it would actually be a lie to say that there's a specific way you can do things to keep things together. And to tell you the truth, things are not together. You are actually just trying to do your best under the circumstances, and being grateful when you have the support, and understanding when things don't go the way they're supposed to, and someone can actually say, don't worry, I understand. So that's actually something that I appreciate, and I'm thankful for.
Wow, thank you so much, Doctor. You know, as you're speaking, I'm just reveling at the human spirit and our resilience. You know, as Bongi spoke earlier, she spoke about our resilience and our ability as humans to grow most during, you know, the time of our highest strife, the time of our highest difficulties. And, you know, with everything that you have to deal with, whether it's the loss, it's the work stress, and you still, at the end of it, say, I am grateful. That is just a testament to our resilience. But most importantly, I'm really excited because somebody is listening out there and thinking that they've gotten the shortest end of the stick. They're living in the most horrible environment. You know, the pandemic has turned their lives upside down, and they just listened to you and they realized, you know, they can pick themselves up. They can recover from what they're going through. They can build and they can sustain. And you know, Doctor, you touched on guilt, and Bongi, I want to take this one to you. What do we say to those that are still sitting, you know, in the corner and completely gutted and completely disillusioned at this point in time, where they say, I've been very cautious, I've mitigated my risks, I've put buffers aside to ensure that, you know, I'm not severely affected. And I always say that COVID took all the risk managers' little Excel spreadsheets and threw it out the window, because had you been sitting in a you know, a strat session 3 years ago and say, you know, as a risk, what if there's a disease that makes us stay all at home and kills massive amounts of people all over the world, not just in our country? Everybody would have told you to, you know, stuff that idea somewhere and made a joke about it the whole day. But what do you say to those risk mitigators? And those are the people that get so disillusioned when things are not going their way. How do we encourage them, and what is the first step you say to that person who's, you know, for all intents and purposes, sitting in a corner saying, I built my business, I mitigated my risks, I was cautious, I followed the right steps, there was COVID, there was riots in Durban, everything has been ripped out of me. I really don't have, I don't have anything in me to start again.
You know, I was thinking as you were talking about the concept of grief, because I mean, Elizabeth talked quite a lot about, you know, the death that she sees around her, and she could also just be going through grief unknowingly, you know, and reacting to it as she goes along. In the same way, when you lose something, you have to understand that there is an element of grief that you're going to go through. And, you know, what do you call it? Guilt. Guilt is part
Yes.
of that, isn't it? You know, anger and all of those things. And and I want to normalize something like that, you know, and I like how, you know, Elizabeth kind of dehumanized, you know, maybe rehumanized, you know, her own story and her job. And through that, we saw the humanity. We didn't see a doctor, we saw a person, because she's a person. And in the same way, I just want to link the conversation a little bit and say, you know, when you're going through that grief or a loss, look at it as whether it is loss of a business or loss of a human being. We all have been going through that grief, but it's such a complicated grief. There's a concept called complicated grief. It's unresolved grief, you know, because you don't have something that you can take your anger towards, you know. When you lose some, like, can you be upset at COVID? You know, it is so intangible that you cannot go to a person and, you know, shake them and say, you know, you made me have this. You could be upset at God, but, you know, you're not going to get God's, you know, voice talking loudly and audibly to you. But, you know, it's normalizing that there is a last stage of grief that was added recently that called finding meaning. And if you can look at that as something that is at the end of a journey and say it's going to be like, you know, a roller coaster, but at the end of it, I have to find meaning out of this so that I can start again, you know. And the quicker you get to that stage of finding meaning, the better, and going towards it. But you know, normalize the fact that you are going to go through periods of difficulty, of depression, of losing hope, but, you know, work towards finding meaning. But I think the greatest thing that we are faced with around this time is isolation. You know, we tend to isolate ourselves, and isolation can quickly get you to a point of dwelling in your grief and dwelling in your anger or your guilt or whichever thing or emotion that you're going through. Is reaching out actually is the one thing that could help all of us, you know, reaching out to other people that know more, reaching out to people that have gone through the same thing, reaching out to your own doctor, reaching out to your psychologist, and not be consumed by the stigma of I'm not okay, and the stigma of seeing a psychologist is kind of taboo, and I don't want people to know. But if you're seeing a psychologist, like, I mean, let's think about it. Who would really know? You know, who would know that you're seeing a psychologist? I remember years ago when I was going through work stress, I'm like, I had to sit and assess myself, and I'm like, I feel like I'm getting depressed, you know? And I wasn't going to wait. And knowing the curve of depression, I'm like, no way there's a line that I know if I go down under, I'm not going to be able to come back. And that was the thing that jolted me. It's like, there's no way I'm going to go under that under that water because I'm not sure if I'm going to come back. I have to resist going through deeper than I am right now. And I'm going to make that short, I'm going to make the curve very, very quick short so that I don't spiral down into my own and dwell into my own, what depression does. Like you sit in your own corner and be upset by yourself and, beat yourself up for something. Go to someone, whether it's a friend or someone, even if it's a professional, that's going to give you a perspective that your brain is not giving you. Because remember, when a brain experiences threat, there are two things that happen is fight or flight, and what the brain does is going to give you the worst case scenario. And there's a reason why the brain does that. It's to prepare you for what if something becomes worse than it is. It feels like if I go down, the worst case scenario is like I'm experiencing it in my head. When it actually does happen, it would be like, okay, I know this. I knew it was going to happen. Your brain is there to protect you. So it does go through that kind of negative spiral. But know when it is getting too much and get help to get someone to show you about, but have you thought about this? Have you spoken to someone? And suddenly you find opportunities opening up and like, no, I actually haven't, let me do that. So don't isolate yourself during this time, whether it's work-related stress or it's personal stress or grief that you're going through, connect with others and reach out. I think as outliers, I was, when I saw the topic about outliers, and I was like, why do they call it outliers? What are outliers? I started Googling it, and outliers actually, I realized it's a statistical term, isn't it? In a bell curve, it's like one of those dots that's kind of sit like over there.
Of the curve.
Exactly. And those are seen as anomalies and abnormal, but you are calling us outliers. Every single one of us represent those outliers. Is as someone that is different from the norm, what is my responsibility in this situation? Our responsibility is to reach out. Reach out to a friend that you haven't spoken to. How do you know that they are not going through some difficult time? At that time, they are so isolated that they're just waiting for someone to reach out. And even you don't have to offer anything, you don't have to offer money, but you can say, I was just thinking about you, so I thought I should call you. Are you okay? How's your family? That is the responsibility of the outliers. And those are the conversations that we need to be having at this time and say, what is my responsibility? The president is not going to solve the things that are important to me in my family. I don't know, the doctors cannot solve everyone's issues, but what am I, I'm so for living a purposeful life, not like the book, we've probably all read the book or seen the book or said, one day I'm going to read the purposeful, the purposeful life. But really, let's think about it. Is in this situation, how am I a difference? I came to a point where I asked myself recently, I think when I turned 40, long time ago, I did. You have no idea. I said, but why am I here? I could be spending the next 10 years doing exactly the same thing and repeating the same thing, maybe with different organizations, but doing the same thing. But I'm not feeling like I am living my purpose. Lord, help me, guide me. What am I here for? I have to be doing something that makes sense. But when I saw the title around Outliers, it just said, that is what I was I was thinking, this is the thing that I was thinking is all of us have a reason for existence. And when the pandemic hits, it's like a pin in the behind that says, why are you here today? Why are you still alive at this time? What is your purpose? What is the difference? Even if my purpose is like, make a difference in my child's life, it's enough. But I'm recognizing that I am parenting differently and with much more intention at this point in time. At my work, I'm calling people, I'm finding out if they are okay. I'm just that one person that when everyone is feeling isolated or nobody cares about me, I'm the person where the people said, oh, wow, you know what, you made my day. I was feeling so depressed today. I was feeling like nobody cares that I'm sick. I'm still getting calls, but they know that I'm sick. I'm feeling like so upset just to get a call that says, how am I doing, has just really made my day. So I think that is what we need to be asking ourselves. When you know that you have a friend, like you say, that has lost a job, what do we do? People don't want to feel more vulnerable, but let's break through that and say, I know you're not going to accept this, but I'm going to give you anyway. I'm leaving it here, just don't follow me, don't give it back. It's yours. Even if you can say, God has just touched me to do this, it's a blessing, just keep it. It's fine. That's what an outlier does. Is in a pandemic in the world, then what am I here for? Not just for the family, but people that have been impacted by the outbreak. The uprising. Sorry, I might be calling it wrong. I mean, people call it insurrection. All of those things is, what is the little thing that I can do as an outlier that is different from the norm, that is different from what is expected of everyone else, that would make me a difference, even if in one person's life. It's fine. It's a one piece of bread. It's okay. I'm just going to give it, because it would, if I don't give it, it would be stayed in my house. It's those little things that we need to just think of, and just understanding that we are not isolated. We are living in this ecosystem with so many people. I think what we've realized over the past month is there's such a thin line between the haves and the not haves. And when it hits on the not haves, it suddenly hits on the haves very quickly, and that was just so visible. So if we understand that we are in one humanity and we are there to make a difference in each other's lives, we can reach out to each other and stay connected and not isolate ourselves.
Wow, Bongi. You have just articulated our own theme to us in the most amazing way. Creating a generation of outliers. And, what you've articulated has been what's been in our minds and what's been in our hearts at the core of our work as BBF this year, to say, despite everything that is going on, we are going to be the generation of people that are not going to fall into that dip that you were referring to earlier on. We are going to operate outside of that curve and make something of our lives, no matter what is thrown at us. And on that note, time is so fast spent. When I thought of our discussion today, I really thought we'd talk for 30 minutes and it would be done, and we're nowhere near done. So Sehodi, who's the timekeeper, is giving me the eye. But what I want to do right now is I'd love to just open the floor, if it's okay with everyone. There's some fantastic questions that are coming through. And, one of the things that I don't really like about these questions that get written, you don't feel the heart of the person in the question when you read it. So I can say, Lufuno says. So I'd like to open it to the team, and team, some of the questions that you've thrown in our chat, I'd like to give you an opportunity to articulate them yourselves and pose them to our panelists. Lufuno, if I can start with you. Unmute. Remember lesson number 1, unmute.
No, I just did, Madam Chair. So at Bongi, earlier on you were saying that now because you are an employee and you're used to the office setup, now you are working from home, now you are anxious. Is my manager aware as to how productive I am and my delivery? Now because I don't see my manager every day, what is my manager's perspective of my work ethics? And then you said there must be communication. So what do you say to those employees who are sort of anxious, like they have anxiety? How do I approach my manager? So if I do email, will that be satisfactory? Do I call my manager? How do I do it? And then at the end of the day, they say, no, it's fine, I'm not gonna do anything, I'm gonna wait for my manager to complain or to reach me. So what do you say to those ones? Thank you.
Thanks, Lufuno. It's such a common thing with all our managers. I think you do have that anxiety if you have not, whether you've built a good relationship with your manager or you have not. It depends on the topic that you want to bring into the conversation. And if you are not sure, it does naturally bring that level of kind of anxiety. And if it has to do with productivity and performance, it's even worse, because if you cannot control the outcome of the conversation, it's natural to bring anxiety. And sometimes there is what we call good anxiety, because it puts you on your toes very quickly. It makes you plan very, to structure your thoughts. But to cut, my answer a little bit short, is when you are prepared and you send an agenda up front, it controls the conversation into what the outcome is. And be very clear when you get into a crucial conversation, because that's what we are talking about here. Crucial conversation you have to plan for. You don't just ring them as you go along. You have to plan ahead, because the point about getting into that conversation is to get the outcome that you want. So you control the outcome of that meeting. If you are brave enough to have that conversation, my suggestion is send an agenda up front so that you can just go through the points that you've prepared. Because the thing that's going to put you off your toes is suddenly your manager brings something that you did 2 years ago, and you're like, oh my goodness, now it puts you on the back foot when you were like very, you thought, okay, I'm here to talk about this and the meeting is going to, and you come out thinking, but it was just about, her or him, I didn't even get the chance to do it. So if you send them an agenda, you can actually say, I'd like to start with point 1, which is this, and that, and then do this and do that and talk about this. And finally, then maybe if you have time, I'll be glad to hear what you want to say to me. But it structures your thought, it controls the outcome that you want to do, and it helps you not go into silence, and when the conversation becomes very threatening, there is a chance in a crucial conversation that we call, moving into that silence, where now, it puts you in that child state that I talked about. It's like, okay, I'm going to allow them to speak. Obviously, what can I say? Don't allow yourself to do that. Or you get yourself uptight and defensive, and now you start becoming all worked up. The minute you start becoming all worked up, logic goes out of the window at that time. You cannot even you lose your own structure in terms of what you wanted to get out, and open up things that you never even wanted to open up. So I would say prepare for it. And if you are more, it's the relationship is that strained, rather go to someone who can be a mediator in that conversation, or someone in the team or in your HR environment, anyone that you trust, that you can talk to prior to that conversation. They can help you even structure your thinking and say, and play it with them and say, okay, I'm going to say this. And then the person can actually ask you questions that you have not considered going into that conversation. that can help a great deal. So 3 things. Prepare for the meeting, send out an agenda of what you want to talk about so that you don't lose the conversation and the outcome. 2, you can bring in a mediator into the conversation, someone that your manager also trusts, to have in there, and someone that can also have your back and understand your situation. Or do a dry run with someone that you can trust, that knows your leader or whoever you want to talk to, and they can ask you the relevant questions that you can start preparing a little bit more on. But it gives you have to go there with a sense of control. Don't go there as an underdog. Control the narrative of the conversation.
Bongi, I think there's a theme that is coming out, and no matter how we pose the question from different angle, Lufuno, it really comes down to reach out, communicate, and take responsibility for the outcome of your career, where it is. Take responsibility. Acknowledge that you are an adult. And if you do have anxiety, then prepare, do dry runs, do everything that you would do if it was an interview. Because I would look at it as the same type of anxiety. If you really have a threatening and overpowering boss, prepare as much as you would prepare for an interview and you wanted a job. Nozizwe, you also had quite a fantastic question earlier on, which was more for Dr. Elizabeth. I can't see the question anymore, but can you please come in with that? Can I hand over to you?
Oh, hi, thank you. It was not even more of a question, it was more of a comment, maybe an observation. As we visit various workplaces, and I remember I was in one of the hospitals, we were doing a health and safety inspection, and one of the nurses or employees approached and said, you know what, I was in isolation and I recovered. I was still trying to just think about what happened because I had contracted this, but my employer was like, please come back to work. Remember, you took an oath, so please come back. So, and there was not proper handling when someone was just exposed. Remember, everyone was anxious because we do not know what this COVID is. We don't have information. So now you are a doctor, you are a health professional, you are expected to go and perform your duty. And at the same time, you don't even have sufficient resources like your PPE. You are in that state. I think that is one of the observations that I have noted. So it was more on that line. Maybe Dr. Elizabeth can maybe comment on that, because that I believe that is one of the contributing factors. And I think one of the things that I also observed is that most of us now had to come back and work from home. Yeah. And immediately the boundaries of working from 7:30 to 4 or whatever, they were now not considered. And now you are expected to be at home and then mind your child. And one thing I think that we've also, because now we want to be productive at work, we also ignore the sense that, okay, what kind of psychological impact me sitting on my laptop and not being able to give my children attention because they also want attention, they can't play outside, has on our children. So I think that was more also directed to Bongi to say, now how do we now say no to our managers to say, you know what, my work time is from this time and this time. I'm also under pressure and I need to assist my children with homeworks and all that. And then one last question maybe to Sis Bongi. Are people really reaching out if they are having issues? Now we're looking at COVID, or is there a stigma still attached to, I have COVID now, I have to kind of like go and tell people I have COVID and everything else? Are we really dealing with that stigma, or is it still something taboo to say, you know what, because I've realized some people are scared to say, I had COVID. So they still hide it. And I'm like, okay, why would I hide? I've got COVID. It should be something that is common. Those are my view. Yeah.
Thank you, Nozizwe. Maybe Dr. Elizabeth, if you can just answer the first part of the question or statement / observation, and then Bungi, you can take over.
I might not have had some of the statements properly initially. There was a little bit of a break. I couldn't hear nicely. But I think she mentioned something about being in isolation and being expected to come back sooner, if I got it right. I think in especially the healthcare setting, we have seen that quite often. And I think it's driven by the fact that when one person is actually off, let's say sick in isolation, then the other people now more of the work fall on them, because then the other person is now off, and people tend to be a little bit anxious and expect more, and have unreasonable expectations, if I can put it like that. That no, this one, I've actually heard someone saying, no, but are they really sick? I mean, it's just COVID. I mean, if they're not having really symptoms, they should actually come back. So sometimes we can find ourselves being insensitive because of the pressure that we are feeling as well. But I think it helps that it's not just one person that is in charge of what happens to the employees or a human resource. And we just all have to be careful, especially if you are at a managerial level, to actually realize that someone didn't just go and ask to have COVID and now has to isolate. And the body does need time to heal, as much as the workload is going to be a bit more on the others. But we just have to hold the fort until the person comes back at whatever time they have to come back. But it has been an issue, and it has been discussed in the work setting. There has been many arguments, and how are we going to deal with this? But at the end of the day, understanding also basic work conditions, and how employees have to be treated, and understanding that when someone is sick, they are sick. And we just have to do what we can under the circumstances until they get well. So that has been a challenge, but I think it has been tackled in a way that eventually made sense. The other thing, I know Bongi will probably tackle it much more in terms of the stigma. From my experience and now, the stigma is actually not as much as it was before, with the first or second waves. Now it's kind of like we all expect, if I can put it like that, that anyone can actually have COVID. I remember one of my colleagues, when we actually at work, and then they were saying, no, but you see, this one, they did say that she's positive, and you all just think positive is positive COVID. Now we even forget that there was TB, there was HIV, and they were not even talking about positive for COVID. So that's how in our minds now we've actually accepted the fact that most people are going to get COVID, and I haven't seen it as much of a stigma anymore. It's like, oh, okay, this person again, another one has COVID. All right, we'll wait, and then we'll see them when they come back. So I think that was how much I heard from what she was commenting about.
Thank you, Dr. Bongi. If I can hand over to you.
Nosizwe, I think you are right. There is a level of stigma in the workplace, but I totally agree with what Elizabeth had said. If you looked at where we were last year, sometime when COVID started, even though it was kind of further away from us, it would be like, we're watching TV and things happening in Europe and, in America, and it sounded so far. And the minute it started closing in, it started having that kind of stigma. But now I think people are getting more and more open to say it. So there is a little bit of difficulty though in the workplace, in the sense that normally when a person is sick, anyone in the team can know, right? And what we're finding is, with the POPI Act and everything that is hitting us now, you have to be careful with how you share the news that you receive as a manager with everyone else, because you're infringing on the rights of the others and sharing a personal medical, which in any case, you can't even share a medical diagnosis. But because COVID is so widespread and it's like in the tip of our tongues, we find ourselves just saying, oh, did you know that Lufuno, is sick with COVID? No, but, if it was HIV, would you say it? No, you wouldn't. You'd be kind of like more, conservative about those things. But yeah, I think one person said to me, why are we not sending care packages to people with COVID? And I said, being in HR, obviously, I would know who has COVID. They don't know that I know. They shared it with their line manager. The line manager, from a care perspective and being a responsible employer perspective, felt, HR should know. But I said the difficulty here is that the minute, if I know the person, it's easy for me to call them and say, I heard that you had COVID and all of that. But you also have to think about a person saying, now everyone now knows, my manager has gone and tell the whole world that I have COVID. So there's a little bit of sensitivity with regards to sharing a medical diagnosis with people, even if it's in human capital space. You have to be careful how you enter that relationship to show that you are a responsible and a caring employer. But at the same time, you don't want the person thinking, because it can easily, like, if you don't know, you can think like, when I come back, everyone now knows. But if you have a small, intimate team, then I think it's better, one, to keep it within the team, to keep managers responsible in terms of reaching out to the person and checking them. I think that is what is so important, just having that level of care. If you are an employer out there, to just take a call, pick up a call and say, how are you doing today? How are the symptoms? If you feel it's getting worse, have you seen your doctor, and all of those things. But I think Elizabeth will tell us that probably the Delta variant is acting up in ways that, even physicians are discovering as they go along. Recently, I learned of a term, long COVID, which means that after you recovered, actually the symptoms continue to manifest, and you have this brain fog that happens if you were very sharp and could work late hours and blah, 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 and suddenly 4 o'clock you're feeling exhausted and you have to sleep. It will impact on work naturally. But if leaders understand, and we are able to bring people like our physicians into the workplace to help us understand what the impact of this thing is, and how can we lead differently, so that we can have a little bit of compassion to people when they don't display the same level of, rigor in meetings and all of that. And we have to understand what the impact of, what does long COVID mean, and what is the impact on employees and productivity and all of those things. But when it comes to the basic conditions of employment, because you were talking about it earlier, is every employer has the responsibility, if they have proof that the person is ill, to give the person time off, you know. But I mean, that guilt thing that we're talking about, Ayanda, we all have it. You know, you feel like, you know what, I know I've submitted this proof that I have tested COVID positive, but I just feel like, you know, if I don't do anything, people know that, you know, symptoms are not as severe that they will. I'm not in hospital, I'm at home. So it means that there's an expectation that I can answer that email and all of those. Just take a little bit of better self-care. You know best. Communicate to whoever needs to know. Communicate that you are not well. Communicate that you have a headache that day. Communicate that can I have half a day? You know, I can assist in this project, but I can assist for this long. Or, sorry guys, I'm just out of it. I've handed over to someone else. I think it's the responsibility that you take with your work, especially if it's high stakes and it involves clients and the impact on the organization is huge. You have the responsibility to say, okay, now I need to take time out. How can we just make sure that this piece of work does not fall through the cracks? Who can we hand over this? Because naturally it's going to be your responsibility, isn't it? You hold that portfolio. You can't just say I was sick. It's no longer enough to just say that. You have to say, I'm handing over this piece of work to you as my manager, distribute it as I think that if we drop this ball, I'm not going to be around, but it would impact 1, 2, and 3. Please, can you make sure that somebody picks it up? Then that is being responsible in the work that you do, even as an individual. But you have a right to be offered leave. I think even though we didn't talk about vaccination and the impact on that in the workplace, I know it's a topical conversation, but there are also regulation and directive that we've been given from an occupational health and safety perspective on how to treat employees during this time. You know, the Department of Labor is very clear in terms of how employers need to react when they deal with these situations and be responsible and counsel employees as well when they feel like they don't understand the impact of their decisions when you come to work feeling ill. You know, it's a responsibility that you have to your fellow employees, that you don't push yourself to go to work knowing that you are coughing. Your responsibility is to call your employer and say, I am coughing, I'm going to see the doctor, I'm going to have a test. If it becomes positive, then this is what I'm going to do. Do you agree? Can I come to the office now that it's after 10 days? Call someone and find out what the protocols are in the workplace, and maybe you're not supposed to be there. You know, you don't want to put yourself in a situation where somebody gets COVID and they have underlying conditions and they complicate and they said, well, the last person that was here was, you know, no Zizwe. Maybe it's now you're sitting with the guilt of, you know, I've made a colleague ill and I was not supposed to be there. I think all of us have a responsibility here, and we're living a life of a generation of outliers. Let's do things differently, responsibly, but at the same time, self-care. I just want to say it is so important that we take care of ourselves, that we put ourselves first, but also be responsible in the portfolio that is in your care, to just make sure that nothing impacts the job that you do, because you are a responsible employer, but you also have a responsibility to yourself and to your family and to your fellow colleagues.
Thank you so much, Bongi and Doctor, for those responses. Time is so fast spent, and I'm very cognizant of the fact that we have very busy people. And again, we cannot thank you enough for spending your Thursday evening with us free of charge. I know, Bongi, as a coach and Elizabeth as a doctor, this is premium content at a very, very high rate per hour. And we are almost moving into the 2-hour mark. But just quickly, Bongi, before I summarize, I like what you kept emphasizing about be responsible. And maybe this is a topic for another day, team. The topic of how employers themselves, and considering that some of our patrons at BBF are entrepreneurs and business owners, I'm talking more to them, especially the smaller ones who are more pressed, for resources, where one resource has way more responsibilities than in an average company, that there has tended to be a guilt, not so much from the employee trying to take care of themselves, but just from the demands coming from the employer, to the extent, of creating severe anxiety, which is so counterproductive, because the more anxious you are, the sicker you're going to be, and the more away you're going to be from the urgent work that you are supposed to be taking care of. And what this pandemic has actually done, it's brought us face to face with our mortality, that what you are doing for a living is very critical and important, but taking care of yourself and being courteous to other humans around you supersedes what work you actually do on a day-to-day basis. And if I can just get permission from everyone, please stick your hand up if you had a very, very critical question that you can ask in half a minute, can be answered in half a minute. But as I just summarize and lead us out of this session, it's everyone can agree that the main objective of this session has been so eloquently and elegantly met by our speakers. They've touched on all the important things that we had deliberated, all the important points that we had deliberated on before our session, and we have really given us food for thought, some very serious food for thought moving forward. As you know, this is our second installment of the theme, and we are going to be having our third installment within the next 8 weeks or so. But Bongi, starting with you, I just really want to thank you for impressing on us that to be an outlier and, to be an anomaly, it's not this great big rocket science. With small impactful actions of just reaching out to people in need, you can be an outlier in this pandemic, because you can be the one, just that one phone call can be the one that stops a person from even committing suicide, being the worst outcome of depression and mental illness and anxiety. But also just impressing on us that how do we recover from the psychology of what is going through, impressing on us that this is just a pendulum and we need to believe we are going to swing right back up. And whilst we are going through all the trauma that we are, we need to understand that it is a growing phase. And we need to communicate, we need to take responsibility for our outcome. We need to recontract with ourselves, recontract with our employees, and even our employers to make this situation work for us. We need to reach out and get different perspective of the situation that you think is so completely dire and, not solvable, and just getting a perspective from a friend, a family member, a peer. Almost anyone in this point in time is experienced enough with COVID to give you a different perspective of the situation that you are going through. And these are all very tangible things that we can do and start today, this evening, just changing our mindsets about, sitting in the corner and being really anxious and depressed about the situations that we find ourselves. And again, I say that with caution and humility, because there are some very dire situations. And, as we said at the beginning, we are very vulnerable. We are going through a lot. We do have depression. We do have anxiety. We do have some, mental illness issues, which are probably generational, and we've never addressed them. And COVID has brought us face to face with those issues. And we need to be vulnerable enough to understand that we need help and seek the help that we need. So thank you so much for sharing that information with us. It's really, really a mouthful, and very impactful information that we can take forward and move with it today. And then Dr. Elizabeth, oh my gosh, I think you had me very teary at some stage today, and I don't get teary very easily. It takes some very immense situations to move me that much emotionally. But as you said earlier, that we could talk the whole day about the situation in which yourself as a healthcare provider and all your colleagues, the nurses and physios, it is really, really a dire situation. But I love the synergy that came out between both you and Mbongi, where you also implored us and impressed on us that what is making you cope in these immensely difficult conditions is, firstly, open communication with your family, which has taken such massive sacrifice because of your passion. Open communication, trusting your family, a support base, whether it's family, whether it's colleagues, whether it's friends. But I also like what you said, is that in these times, we are all dealing with different pressures in different levels. You said, do what you can, do what is life and death. The next you will get to it, because that's another thing that can cause immense stress and strain and cloud our judgment when you're trying to do everything and even pretending as though you're not going through what you're going through, and you're just juggling so many things and not really getting anywhere. I think Bongi would have a psychological term for that if I asked her, where you're just trying to do everything, you're stretched so thin, and you are basically not being productive in any of those things. So that's another action of the mindset of an outlier. Do what you can, do it well, and then take care of the rest when you have an opportunity to take care of it. Take care of yourself, take care of your health, because without that, our entire discussion is actually quite useless and null and void. And before I sign out, as a facilitator, you always have a very powerful quote by some powerful person. So when I was thinking of the session today, I thought, Ayanda, you're not going to let the ladies' teams down. You're not going to say thank you very much and goodbye. So my powerful quote, and it's one of those anonymous ones. If somebody knows where it's from, please send it to me. But I absolutely loved it. And it spoke to the mood that we desired from this webinar and going forward. And it said, positive people also have negative thoughts. In your self-awareness and self-confidence, self-doubt is always there. However, positive people don't just let those thoughts grow and destroy them. And when I read that, I thought maybe it continues, and in my head it did continue, but that's where it ended. And that was so powerful because talking about mental health, talking about being an outlier, talking about any activity that you want to do, especially with us being so pressed and under so much pressure, and the negative chatter around, whether it's in your head, whether it's around you, whether it's around social media, around the news, we cannot afford to just let those thoughts sit and grow and destroy you. And that really is the purpose of us as the BBF vehicle, to make sure that we are bringing content and we're having the types of discussion and the types of knowledge sharing that will sweep out those negative thoughts and continue sweeping them out. And if I also just link it to something that I read, it was very interesting. And Wongi, you would probably know this as a coach. I read it from a very prominent coach, Sir John Whitmore. And he was talking about performance coaching. And he said, performance, it's not his, he was quoting it as well. Performance is equal to potential less interference. And in anything that you want to perform, if there's interference in that equation, your performance is going to decrease. So what we are trying to do with our webinars and, our discussions, our knowledge sharing, we are trying to decrease the I in the equation. We are trying to decrease the interference so that we can increase the performance and the potential in us, and thus increase our performance. How did I do for a brilliant close off and quoting things? But all in all, thank you so much for sharing this evening with us. Again, Lwazi usually closes off quite eloquently, but he's refused to speak any further for the night. So from my side, I would, before I sign off, I just want to remind you that please keep a watch out on our BBF page, also on the Bethesda Christian Center Facebook page and Instagram. We will be having a third installment. We're going to be talking about financing, how to find it, where to get it. It's going to be quite an interesting chat, but also very excitingly, there's a mentorship program that we are working on, and we'll be also sharing that information with you, and that is going to be very exciting. Just a tangible contribution from our side on all this talking that we do. And really, from the bottom of my heart and on behalf of the team, we'd like to thank everyone that has joined us. I would like to thank the team itself for putting this together. And thank you so much, Ms. Wongi, and thank you so much, Dr. Elizabeth. And good evening, everyone. God bless.
Thank you.